Fear is such an interesting emotion for us as human beings. When we find ourselves locked into a fear mode, we will do all sorts of acts that all seem desperate, just to do whatever we can to avail ourselves of that fear. Oftentimes, the people that we consider to be the most heroic are the people who are willing to act above their fears, to rise up above those things that are terrifying to us and to act in the midst of these fearful moments. But as we're going to see in the story of Jonah today, an act that on the surface may look heroic may not be what we think it is. Seems like it's time for a midweek moment. When we left things off last week, we witnessed as God called Jonah, a prophet of his, who up until this point had only prophesied good things for Israel. God told him to go into the heart of the Assyrian nation and preach repentance, that God was going to cast judgment on them if they did not change their ways. The Assyrians, again, weren't exactly enemies of the Israelites yet, but everybody could kind of tell that it was coming, and the Israelites did not think very highly of the Assyrians anyway. So Jonah wasn't exactly thrilled to do this, and instead of doing this exact thing, whether through self-preservation, worried that the Assyrians might try to kill him if he told them the news, or as an act of blatant rebellion because he just hated the Assyrians so much, Jonah instead turned and fled towards Tarshish. And doing so, he got himself a charter on a boat in order to do this sort of thing. And if you remember, the text itself actually says Jonah was fleeing the presence of God himself. Truly a foolish idea, if ever there was one. And he would learn exactly just how foolish this whole idea was when we pick the story of Jonah back up. See, God really wanted Jonah to go into Nineveh to preach this repentance. And so when Jonah disobeyed, God decided to do something to get his attention. When we pick things up in chapter 1, verse 4, we read, "But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break apart." Now, growing up in the middle of Indiana, I don't exactly have a ton of experience on boats. I can tell you a lot about corn and cornfields, but I can't tell you much about being on the open sea, so it probably would only take a mild windstorm and a little bit of rocky waves for me to be a little bit scared about my situation. But the guys who are on this boat with Jonah, they are hardened, experienced sailors. Probably we can assume that these guys have seen every kind of storm that could happen on the open waters, and they have lived to tell the tale every single time. And so when verse 5 tells us that these guys were terrified, that they were afraid, that these hardened sailors who'd seen everything the sea could possibly throw at them are scared, that should tell us all we really need to know about how bad this storm is. These guys are so scared that they are doing everything that they can to try to make sure that they're going to survive. They are throwing cargo, the very cargo that they were chartered to carry with them, the thing that's going to result in them getting paid when they reach their destination. They are chucking it off the sea. They are casting everything aside in the hopes of being able to survive this. The text even tells us these guys are calling out to every deity that they possibly can in the hopes that someone will save them. Whatever God it is that comes to their rescue, they don't care as long as it results in them surviving. So where's Jonah when all this is going on? Where is this prophet of God while this boat is being threatened to be capsized? Where is this man of God when these sailors are doing everything that they can to try to survive? Well, he's asleep in the hold of the ship. Let it be known, no matter how rough your circumstances might be in the moment, you can always take a nap. But they wake Jonah up and they get him up there with him, trying to figure out what's going on. And there's something about this storm that feels different. It feels supernatural even. And so they decide to kind of cast lots. They get it in their heads that some god, some deity has it out for at least one of them. And so they decide to cast lots to find out who is it that these gods who've sent this horrible storm are mad at. And, well, there's a reason why this book is titled Jonah and not somebody else's name. everything comes back to Jonah, and they ask him, what are we supposed to do now that we know that you're the problem? What do we do with you that might appease your God to stop this storm from happening? And he tells them what to do in verse 12. It says, he said to them, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. And that feels kind of extreme, doesn't it? Pick me up and throw me into the water because all of this is my fault. And initially the sailors themselves, they don't want to do this because they're worried that they're going to result in the death of this guy, and they don't want to be held accountable for this sort of thing. But as the storm continues to rage on, and after they run out of other things to cast into the sea and they have no other choice, they finally get in their heads, you know what, we might as well give this a try. And so as the kids would say, they yeeted him off of the boat. Did I say that right, Brad?
Oh, just keep me out of it.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate your help here, bud. But throwing Jonah overboard, it seemed to actually work. Verse 15 says, so they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. So it worked, right? Everything worked out perfectly. I mean, he willingly let them throw him overboard so that God would end the raging storm, and everything works out because the fish is coming. Jonah is going to course correct. Everything is going to work out great, right? Well, here's the thing. And to be completely honest with you, the first time somebody pointed this out to me, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. Jonah did not know about the fish. Right? You and I know about the fish, and most of the time we've heard about the fish, sometimes from a very early age, and so we just assume that Jonah must have known the fish was coming, but Jonah had no idea. When Jonah says, pick me up and hurl me into the sea, he is saying, I'm okay if I die, as long as I don't have to go to Nineveh. He is on this boat in the first place because of disobedience to God. God called him to go to Nineveh. He said, I'm going to run away instead. And now, as God has caused this storm to happen, Jonah is essentially saying, pick me up and throw me in the sea because I would rather die than continue to go to Nineveh. It looks heroic on the surface that Jonah is willing to sacrificially be hurled into the sea in order to save these sailors. But make no mistake about what the situation is. This is disobedience compounded by further disobedience. We have this thing about us as human beings of sanctifying actions that we know to be wrong. Sure, what I told them was a lie, but that's got to be better than hurting their feelings, right? Yeah, I know I shouldn't have taken that thing from that store, but that company has got terrible practices. They're not good people, so it's okay that I did this. We do or say things that we know we shouldn't do, and we try to justify that. We know that these actions disobey God. We know that they're wrong, that His Word tells us not to do these things, but we always like to say, yeah, but. And we kind of throw those sorts of ways in trying to write them off as a good thing when we know that they are not, thereby compounding our sinful behavior. Understand, there is no such thing as a good or a justified sin. Jonah could have saved himself and these sailors a whole lot of headache in the first place had he simply obeyed God to begin with. Him saying, throw me off here in this supposed heroic moment, this is still him attempting to disobey God's initial command. Our best result, long term, will always be if we obey in the first place. It might not be comfortable. It might not even be easy, but it's always right. So let's be people who seek to obey Him in all ways first. And then we don't need to put any innocent sailors at risk. It's crazy to think that we are nearly halfway through the month of September already. But we are still in the process of working our way through the book After I Believe by James Emery White. Again, this is our book of the month. It's got a lot of really good insight and information, whether you are it's especially written for new Christians, but even if you're an experienced Christian, it's got a lot of good things in there for you. I love this book. I think it's a fantastic book. I honestly wish this book had been out when I first came to Christ. Things that it took me years to learn, this book covers in a short amount of time. And so I can't help but wonder how much further along in my walk with Christ would I be if I'd had this book whenever I first became a Christian. But can't go back. We can only go forward. So make sure you pick up a copy of After I Believe by James Emery White. Well, we finally reached the fish, or at least we're about to see the fish next week whenever we get back together. But this has been your midweek moment. Take care of yourselves and each other. I wonder what the inside of a fish smells like.